Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. This is my first intro, so like a shih tzu, it's probably gonna be a little rough. Plato's Allegory of the Cave is a conversation between two people, Plato's brother Glaucon and his mentor Socrates, and I've been thinking about it a lot. It feels like a good place to start. In the dialogue, Socrates asks Glaucon to picture men dwelling in a sort of subterranean cave. Each of them has been in this cave since they were born, restrained in place with heavy chains around their necks and legs so that they can't move. All they can do is sit and stare at the cave wall. Now, the next part's a bit funny to me because Plato basically invents the concept of TV. He then asks Glaucon to picture a road behind and above the prisoners that has a fire burning. This casts light on the wall in front of the prisoners, but they can't turn their heads to look at the road. So the only information they have to go off of are the shapes of shadows on the wall. Behind them, people walk along the road carrying a variety of differently shaped objects. Many resemble real-life items like people, trees, and animals. But because all the prisoners see is this puppet show, they develop a game where they sit and they name the different objects being shown. And if, for example, someone behind them were to cough or make a barking sound, they would assume it was the sound that shadows make. And shadows are not the same as the real thing. In essence, these prisoners are attempting to make sense of their existence. Or you could just treat it like Jeopardy, but for cave people. To these people, the shadows and the artificial objects are the real world, and it's a very small world. So when one of the prisoners is released from the cave, at first he's in denial. As the person who released this prisoner attempts to point out the puppets, now that the prisoner can turn around, he doesn't want to believe it. To him, the shadows on the wall are more real than this completely worldview-altering information. Everything he's ever known was a cheat, an illusion, a cheap imitation of the real thing, with all its form and color and texture and nuance missing. That's a hard pill to swallow. It's so bad he actually has to be forcibly dragged out of the cave into the sunlight. And after being in the dark so long, the harsh light of the sun would be painfully bright. In fact, the prisoner probably wouldn't be able to see anything outside of the cave at all. At least for a while. Given enough time, his eyes would adjust. He might begin by looking at the shadow of things outside of the cave when it's dark. If there was a lake, he might be able to see reflections of trees and mountains on the surface of the water, maybe even the reflection of stars in the sky. And once he's finally able to look at those objects himself, he'd be able to contemplate the celestial bodies in the sky. As humans, we tend to look at the sun, hopefully not too long, the moon and the stars in awe. Coming from a world where all there is, well, it's just shadows and flickering firelight, this new knowledge would be incredible. For a while, it would probably be enough to simply sit and watch and observe, begin to recognize the patterns of day and night, how the sun affects the seasons. But you can't really forget where you're from. We all have roots. Eventually, the prisoner, now a free man, would probably want to go back to the others, if only to tell them how incredible all these new things would be, because he would realize the life he lived before was small. But after being in the sunlight for so long, he'd have to stumble back down the path into the belly of the cave, where he'd find all of his old friends happily naming shadows and giving each other praise for being the quickest at identifying the different shapes. But now, he'd probably be pretty terrible at recognizing those shadows, and to his old friends, he'd be stupid. To them, he's intruding on their way of life with a bunch of nonsense about colors and textures and the fact that there's more than what they know. And they take a lot of pride in what they know, because this has been their entire life. They've built an entire system around being able to recognize shadows, which results in them killing him. I think this part especially is pretty poignant because Socrates, Plato's mentor, friend, and the teacher in this story, was executed for challenging the status quo. He was condemned for corrupting young people in Athens with the idea that maybe the gods weren't real. This is the allegory of the cave. And it's a heavy one. Let's get one thing straight. You are allowed to change your mind. I was watching a professor give a lecture on the allegory of the cave to a group of students while I was researching material for this video. Dr. Harrison Kleiner of Utah State University. I really enjoyed it, so I'll make sure to put the link in the description if you want to watch it yourself. And as I was scrolling through the comments, I noticed this one had made its way to the top. It's a little bit hard to read, so I might mess up in a couple places. The allegory of the cave isn't about, quote, education as much as it is about awareness and knowledge and, at a more developed point of discussion, the awareness that current knowledge is little more than a different point of, quote, conventional thought and opinion on a spectrum leading to enlightenment and truth. And this is, I think, them citing the professor directly. The very moment the allegory of the cave is taught in a school, it ceases to be that which Plato was referencing in the story. By their very nature, educational institutions inculcate, not sure what that means, they don't educate. In fact, the students in that classroom are having chains bound to them by their need to accept the professor's approved interpretation of the allegory. He then goes on to talk about the fact that the professor assigned a quiz, and how if we were to actually go by the Socratic method, you wouldn't give your students quizzes. Referencing Socrates' method of teaching, the banking model of education, and using Paulo, I don't know his name, in a lecture that has negligible student participation, something, and when it does, it's Socratic only to the extent the students are allowed to finish the professor's thought, which misses the point as well. Or at least that's what some scraggly homeless person told me one day at a bus stop when he noticed I was reading The Republic. Fortunately, the cops came and arrested him for being disobedient to the system, so I didn't have to listen to any more of his bullshit that day. Now, Plato meant the allegory to be about education, of the Guardians in particular. Book 7, The Republic, 514 admit that they did not have all the answers. It was people looking at the past work of other people and saying, well, no, I don't think that's right,